The words hit Vivian Lockhart like a slap across the face, though the Duke of Greystone hadn't raised his voice above a conversational murmur. He stood by the window of his study, silhouetted against the grey London morning, his posture rigid as the marble columns flanking his estate's entrance. "Do not touch me in public," he repeated, as if she might have misheard the first time. "Do not speak unless directly addressed. Do not draw attention to yourself in any capacity. You are here to serve my aunt, Miss Lockhart, not to be noticed." Vivian's fingers tightened around the fabric of her modest grey dress, the one she'd carefully mended the night before, stitching the hem with thread that didn't quite match, because she couldn't afford better. She'd arrived at Greystone House an hour earlier, led through servants' passages to this imposing study, told only that the Duke himself wished to establish expectations before she began her duties. She hadn't expected humiliation to be the first item on the agenda. "I understand, Your Grace," she managed, keeping her voice steady despite the heat creeping up her neck. Pride, her father had always said, was the only inheritance that couldn't be taken by creditors. She clung to it now. Duke Nathaniel Beaumont finally turned to face her, and Vivian understood immediately why London's ballrooms whispered about him in tones usually reserved for ghost stories. His face was striking in a severe way, dark hair swept back from a high forehead, grey eyes that seemed to catalogue and dismiss her in a single glance, a mouth set in a line that suggested smiling was a language he'd forgotten how to speak. He was younger than she'd imagined. 33, perhaps 34, too young to carry himself like a man who'd already died inside. "My aunt, Lady Margaret, is elderly and occasionally confused," he continued, pacing now with measured steps that echoed off the mahogany panelling. "She requires companionship at social events. You will sit with her, fetch her refreshments, manage her correspondence, and ensure she doesn't exhaust herself. In return, you will receive room, board, and a modest salary." Modest. Vivian nearly laughed. 3 months ago, she'd been the daughter of Baron Lockhart, invited to the same events where she'd now serve as glorified furniture. Then her father's gambling debts had surfaced, staggering amounts owed to men who didn't negotiate. The estate had been seized. The title, worthless without property to support it, became a cruel joke. Her mother had retreated to her sister's home in Bath, her health shattered by scandal. And Vivian had discovered that being gently bred and educated meant precisely nothing when you had no money and no connections willing to acknowledge you. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, Your Grace," she said, "because that's what one said, even when gratitude tasted like ash." "Are you?" His gaze sharpened, and for a moment she thought she saw something flicker in those grey eyes, curiosity perhaps, or suspicion. "Most women in your position would consider this arrangement beneath them. You were presented at court, were you not, 3 seasons ago?" 2 seasons ago, Your Grace." She lifted her chin slightly. "And positions, I've learned, are luxuries one can no longer afford when one's father dies in debt." Something shifted in his expression, though she couldn't name it. He moved closer, and she caught the scent of bergamot and something darker, tobacco maybe, or the peculiar smell of old money and older grief. "Then we understand each other," he said quietly. "You need employment. I need someone discreet who can manage my aunt without causing scandal or drawing unwanted attention to this household. The rules I've outlined aren't personal, Miss Lockhart. They're necessary." There it was again. That emphasis on necessary, as if he were convincing himself rather than her. "May I ask why, Your Grace?" The question escaped before she could stop it, and she saw his jaw tighten. "You may not." He stepped back, creating distance as deliberate as a fortress wall. "Lady Margaret will explain your duties in detail. You'll have Sundays off and access to the library. The housekeeper, Mrs. Davison, will show you to your room. Do you have any questions about what I've told you?" "Yes," she thought. "Why do you look at me as if I'm something dangerous? Why establish rules about touching when I'm so far beneath your notice that I shouldn't even register as human?" But she said, "No, Your Grace." "Good." He moved toward his desk, effectively dismissing her. "One more thing, Miss Lockhart." She paused at the door. "The season begins in 2 weeks. Lady Margaret will attend every major event. You will accompany her. You will be present in some of London's finest ballrooms." His back was to her now, his voice dropping to something that might have been warning or might have been regret. "You will see people you once knew. People who will pretend not to recognize you. You will watch men you once danced with waltz past you as if you're invisible." Vivian's throat constricted. He understood then. He knew exactly what he was asking of her, to return to the world that had cast her out, but only as a shadow, a servant, a reminder of how far someone could fall. "I can endure it," she said softly. He glanced over his shoulder, and for a heartbeat their eyes met. Something passed between them, recognition perhaps, the acknowledgement that they were both people who'd learned to endure. "See that you do," he said, "because I won't tolerate drama, Miss Lockhart. I won't tolerate scandal, and I won't tolerate anyone in my household who draws the wrong kind of attention. Do we understand each other?" "Perfectly, Your Grace." She left before he could see the way her hands trembled. Lady Margaret Beaumont was nothing like her nephew. Where Nathaniel was cold, she was warm. Where he was rigid, she was gentle. She sat in the morning room, surrounded by embroidery hoops and half-finished letters, her silver hair catching the light, her smile immediate and genuine when Vivienne entered. "Oh, my dear." She set aside her needlework and reached for Vivienne's hands, squeezing them with surprising strength. "You must be Miss Lockhart. Come, sit with me. Mrs. Davison, tea, please, and those lovely biscuits." Vivienne found herself guided to a chair, enveloped in the kind of uncomplicated kindness she hadn't experienced in months. Lady Margaret chattered about the weather, the garden, her correspondence with friends in Bath. Ordinary, soothing conversation that required nothing from Vivienne except listening. "My nephew must have frightened you half to death," Lady Margaret said suddenly, pouring tea with steady hands that belied her supposed frailty. "He frightens everyone these days. Didn't used to, you know. Before Caroline died, he was quite different." Vivian's teacup paused halfway to her lips. Caroline, the late Duchess. She'd heard whispers, of course. Everyone had. The beautiful young Duchess who died 3 years ago under circumstances that polite society didn't discuss. Some said illness, others hinted at something darker, though never loudly enough for the Duke's solicitors to hear. "I shouldn't speak of it," Lady Margaret continued, reading Vivian's silence correctly, "but you should understand why he's built those walls so high. Caroline was troubled. The marriage wasn't happy. And when she died, society blamed Nathaniel, said he'd driven her to it, whatever it was. He's been punishing himself ever since, keeping everyone at arm's length, convinced that if he just controls everything, every word, every gesture, every interaction, nothing else can go wrong." "That sounds exhausting," Vivian said quietly. "It is." Lady Margaret's eyes were sharp despite her years. "For him and everyone around him. But you're not here to fix my nephew, dear. You're here to help me, and perhaps to remind him that not everyone in this house needs to be kept at a distance." Over the following week, Vivienne learned the rhythms of Greystone House. She woke early, helped Lady Margaret with correspondence, accompanied her on short walks through the garden, and read to her in the afternoons. The work was easy, the old woman's company pleasant. If this had been the extent of her duties, Vivienne might have found something approaching contentment, but the Duke's presence haunted the house like a ghost that cast shadows. She saw him rarely, brief glimpses in corridors, his voice carrying from behind closed study doors, the sound of his footsteps late at night when she couldn't sleep. He never sought her out, never acknowledged her beyond the occasional nod if they passed. She might have been a piece of furniture for all the attention he paid her, yet she found herself noticing things. The way he stood too straight, as if relaxing, might shatter him. The tired lines around his eyes that suggested sleep was as elusive for him as it was for her. The moments when she'd catch him staring at nothing, his expression so bleak it made her chest ache. And once, passing his study late one evening, she'd heard him speaking to someone, his steward perhaps, about tenant housing reforms, his voice intense with conviction as he described plans to improve living conditions on his estates. It was the first time she'd heard passion in his tone, the first hint that beneath the ice something human still burned. She'd hurried past before he could discover her eavesdropping, but the conversation haunted her. He wasn't simply the cold aristocrat he pretended to be. He was a man who cared, who wanted to change things, but who'd locked himself away from any connection that might make him vulnerable again. The season began with Lady Thornbury's ball, and Vivian understood immediately why the Duke had warned her. The ballroom glittered with candlelight and jewels, filled with faces she recognized, women who'd once invited her to tea, men who'd signed her dance cards, families who'd smiled at her across drawing rooms. Now they looked through her as if she were made of glass. She sat beside Lady Margaret in a chair against the wall, wearing her best dress, a deep blue silk that had been expensive once, but now showed its age in ways only another woman would notice. Her role was clear: be present, be useful, be invisible. "That's Lord Winter's dancing with the Pemberton girl," Lady Margaret murmured, her commentary providing a lifeline of normalcy. "He'll offer for her by month's end, mark my words. And there's my nephew, looking as if he'd rather be anywhere else." Vivian's gaze found the Duke of Greystone across the ballroom. He stood with a group of men, politicians and peers, judging by their self-important postures, listening with apparent attention, while his eyes remained distant. He wore black evening clothes that made him look even more severe, his cravat tied with mathematical precision, every line of his body radiating controlled power. As if sensing her attention, his gaze shifted, landing on her for a fraction of a second before moving away. No acknowledgement, no recognition, just as he'd promised. "You will watch men you once danced with waltz past you as if you're invisible." "He needs someone to soften him," Lady Margaret said thoughtfully. "Someone brave enough to ignore his rules." "I'm here to follow his rules, my lady, not break them." "Are you?" The old woman's smile was knowing. "We'll see about that." The evening progressed with painful slowness. Vivian fetched champagne, adjusted Lady Margaret's shawl, smiled politely at the few people who deigned to acknowledge the Duke's aunt. She watched couples whirl past in dances she'd once participated in, heard laughter she'd once contributed to, and felt the weight of invisibility settle over her like a shroud. Then Lady Cordelia Ashworth arrived, and the temperature in the ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vivian recognized her immediately, the Earl of Ashworth's daughter, known for her beauty and her ambition in equal measure. Tall, golden-haired, draped in emerald silk that probably cost more than Vivian's entire year's salary, Cordelia moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything in her life. Her gaze found the Duke, and her smile sharpened. "Oh dear," Lady Margaret murmured. "I was afraid she'd be here." "Nah, who is she?" "Someone who wanted very much to be the Duchess of Greystone and hasn't forgiven Nathaniel for choosing Caroline instead." Lady Margaret's hand tightened on Vivian's arm. "She's dangerous, that one. Watch her carefully." Vivian watched as Cordelia approached the Duke, her movements calculated, her hand touching his arm in a gesture just intimate enough to spark whispers. The Duke's face remained impassive, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle tension that spoke of deep discomfort. "He should refuse her," Vivian whispered. "He can't. Her father chairs the committee reviewing Nathaniel's housing reform bill. One wrong move and months of work could be destroyed." Lady Margaret sighed. "Politics makes us all prisoners, dear." Cordelia laughed at something one of the men said, her hand still resting on the Duke's sleeve. To anyone watching, they looked like exactly what society expected. A powerful duke and an eligible lady, the kind of match that made sense on every practical level. Vivienne turned away, telling herself the sudden tightness in her chest was merely sympathy, nothing more. The Duke had made his position clear. She was here to be invisible, and invisible she would remain. But as the music swelled and couples took to the floor, she couldn't help thinking about the man she'd heard late that night, speaking with such passion about improving lives, fighting for change. That man wouldn't let someone like Cordelia manipulate him through political pressure. That man, she suspected, was buried so deep beneath walls of grief and control that he'd forgotten he existed. The confrontation came 3 days later in the most unexpected way. Vivienne was in the library, her favorite refuge in Greystone House, returning a volume of poetry Lady Margaret had finished. The room was vast, 2 stories of books climbing toward a painted ceiling, leather chairs positioned by windows that overlooked the garden. She'd discovered it was usually empty in the afternoon, a pocket of peace in an otherwise rigid household. She was reaching for a high shelf when she heard the door open and close with decisive force. "I told you I wasn't interested." The Duke's voice, sharp with barely contained frustration. "My answer remains unchanged." "Because you're a coward." Cordelia's voice dripping with contempt. Vivienne froze, hidden behind a tall shelf, her heart hammering. She should make her presence known, should leave immediately. But moving would reveal she'd heard, and something told her the Duke's reaction would be worse than Cordelia's embarrassment. "I'm being practical," the Duke said coldly. "We wouldn't suit. We'd suit perfectly, and you know it. I have the connections you need, the breeding, the understanding of how power works." Cordelia's footsteps moved closer to wherever he stood. "What I don't understand is why you're wasting yourself on this ridiculous grief. Caroline is dead, Nathaniel. Dead, and mourning her like a Gothic novel hero won't bring her back." The silence that followed was so heavy, Vivienne could barely breathe through it. "You know nothing about my marriage," the Duke finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I know enough. I know she was weak, unstable, utterly unsuitable to be a duchess. I know she made you miserable. I know you feel guilty about her death, but guilt isn't a good enough reason to waste your life." Cordelia's voice softened, turning calculating. "Marry me, Nathaniel. I'll give you heirs, manage your household, support your political ambitions, and I'll never ask you to pretend you love me." Vivienne pressed against the bookshelf, her stomach churning. This was wrong. Listening to this private moment, this brutal negotiation masquerading as a proposal. But she couldn't move without revealing herself, and the Duke's next words locked her in place. "I won't marry again," he said flatly. "Not you, not anyone. I won't put another woman through what Caroline endured. I won't risk—" He cut himself off. "Risk what? Caring, feeling something? God, Nathaniel, you're not even 35. You're going to lock yourself away in this mausoleum forever because you're afraid." "I'm not afraid. I'm realistic." "You're terrified." Cordelia's laugh was sharp. "You're so terrified of losing control again that you've built these absurd rules, these walls, and convinced yourself they're protecting people. But all you're doing is suffocating yourself and everyone around you." There was movement, rustling fabric, the sound of footsteps. "Don't," the Duke said sharply. "Why not? Afraid of being touched, Nathaniel? Afraid you might actually feel something if I—" "Get out! I'm trying to save you from yourself." "I don't need saving. I need you to leave my library, my house, and my life." "The answer is no, Cordelia. It will always be no." A long pause. Then Cordelia's voice turned venomous. "You'll regret this. When my father destroys your precious housing bill, when society remembers why you're really called the Ice Duke, you'll wish you'd been smarter. Then I'll have to live with that regret. I've learned to live with worse." The door slammed. Silence fell like snow. Vivienne remained frozen, counting her own heartbeats, waiting to hear the Duke leave so she could escape unnoticed. But instead, she heard something unexpected, a long, shaking exhale, the sound of someone barely holding themselves together. "You can come out now, Miss Lockhart." Her blood turned to ice. He knew. The entire time he'd known she was there. She stepped from behind the bookshelf, her face burning. The Duke stood by the fireplace, one hand pressed against the mantel, his shoulders rigid. He didn't look at her. "I apologize, Your Grace. I was returning a book when Lady Cordelia arrived. I should have made my presence known, but I didn't want to—" She fumbled for words. "I'm sorry. How much did you hear?" "Too much. Will you gossip about it?" He still hadn't turned to face her. "No. Why not? It would make excellent currency in servants' halls. The Ice Duke refusing the perfect match because he's too damaged to try again." His voice was bitter self-mockery. "Because it's not gossip. It's grief." She spoke quietly, surprised by her own boldness. And grief deserves privacy, not speculation. Finally, he turned. His face was carefully blank, but his eyes, those grey eyes she'd thought cold, held something raw and unguarded. For one moment the walls were down, and she saw straight through to the pain beneath. "You should go," he said. "Should I? Or do you just want me to because I saw something you don't want anyone to see?" "Don't presume to understand me, Miss Lockhart." "I don't presume anything, but I heard what she said about your rules, about walls and suffocation." Vivian took a step closer, driven by something she couldn't name. She wasn't entirely wrong, was she? His jaw tightened. "You're overstepping." "Yes, I am." She had no idea where this courage was coming from. This woman who'd been invisible for months, suddenly speaking truth to one of England's most powerful men. But someone should tell you that refusing to be touched, refusing to let anyone close, refusing to even try living again, that's not protection. That's just another kind of dying. The words hung between them, dangerous and true. "How dare you?" he breathed. "You, who've been in my house less than a fortnight, presume to lecture me about living, about grief? I've been in your house less than a fortnight, but I've been invisible far longer." Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. "I know what it's like to build walls because you're afraid of being hurt again. I know what it's like to convince yourself that if you just stay small enough, quiet enough, unnoticed enough, you'll be safe. It's not the same." "Isn't it?" She held his gaze. "You lost your wife. I lost everything else. My home, my future, my place in the world. We're both hiding, Your Grace. I'm just honest enough to admit it." Silence stretched between them, taut as a violin string. She'd gone too far. She knew it. In minutes, she'd be dismissed, and this time her pride wouldn't feed her or find her another position. She'd ruined everything with her inability to stay silent, to remain invisible as he'd demanded. "You should still go," he said finally, but his voice had lost its edge. He sounded tired, hollowed out. "Before I say something I'll regret." "Will you?" "Will I what? Regret it? Or will you feel relieved that someone finally saw you as something other than ice?" His hand dropped from the mantel. For a moment she thought he might actually answer, might let that wall crack open just enough to let truth through. Instead, he turned back to the fire. "Lady Margaret is waiting for you." Dismissed, but differently this time, not in anger, not in cold authority, but in self-preservation. Vivian left before he could hear how hard her heart was beating. That night, sleepless and confused by her own audacity, Vivienne wandered the darkened house. She'd found Mrs. Davison surprisingly lenient about nighttime wandering, better than lying awake staring at the ceiling, dear. And tonight, she felt too restless for her small room. She ended up in the conservatory, a glass-enclosed space filled with exotic plants the late Duchess had collected. Lady Margaret had told her the Duke never came here anymore, couldn't bear the reminder of Caroline's presence. It was safe, peaceful, the moonlight filtering through leaves to paint silver patterns on the floor. She was examining a rare orchid when she heard footsteps. The Duke stood in the doorway, still fully dressed despite the late hour. They stared at each other, both caught in a place they shouldn't be, and for a long moment neither spoke. "I thought you never came here," Vivian said finally. "I don't, usually." He stepped inside, hands in his pockets, his posture less rigid than she'd ever seen it. "I heard someone moving around, thought perhaps a servant needed something. Just me, unable to sleep. Guilty conscience?" There was no accusation in his tone, just tired curiosity. Something like that. She turned back to the orchid. "I shouldn't have spoken to you that way earlier. It was presumptuous and inappropriate. I apologize." "Do you often apologize for telling the truth?" The question caught her off guard. She glanced at him, found him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "When the truth is unwelcome, yes. What if it's unwelcome because it's necessary?" Her breath caught. Was he actually continuing the conversation, actually acknowledging what she'd said? "The orchids were her passion," he said abruptly, moving toward a particularly exotic specimen. "Caroline. She could spend hours here, talking to them, rearranging them. She said they understood her better than people did." Vivian said nothing, sensing he needed silence to continue. "She was 19 when we married. I was 28. It was arranged, as these things often are. Good families, good connections. I thought we'd learn to be happy." His hand hovered near a bloom but didn't touch. "Instead, we learned to be miserable in increasingly creative ways. You don't have to tell me this. I know, but you saw something today, saw me, that no one else has seen in 3 years. It seems only fair you understand why." He was quiet for a moment. Caroline was fragile, anxious. She hated society, hated being watched, hated the expectations placed on a duchess. Every ball was agony for her, every dinner, every social obligation, every time I had to touch her in public, even just to take her arm, she'd freeze like I'd struck her. Vivian's throat tightened, understanding clicking into place. I tried to protect her, made rules about when we'd attend events, how long we'd stay, how much physical contact would be required. Tried to give her control over her own life. But it wasn't enough. She felt trapped, and I felt helpless, and one morning she locked herself in this conservatory and took enough laudanum to— He stopped, jaw clenched. "The doctor said it was an accident. Too much pain medicine, tragic mistake. Society pretended to believe it. We both know what really happened." "I'm sorry," Vivian whispered. "Don't be. I've had 3 years to accept it." He finally looked at her. "What I haven't accepted is that I didn't cause it. Everyone, Cordelia, society, even myself, believes I killed her through neglect or cruelty or simple incompetence, that if I'd just been different, better, she'd still be alive. That's not true, isn't it? I was her husband. I should have saved her." "Some people can't be saved, Your Grace. Not by love, not by rules, not by anything. Some wounds are too deep." Vivian moved closer, drawn by the naked pain in his voice. "But building walls around yourself, refusing to be touched, refusing to let anyone close, that won't bring her back. It will just ensure you die too, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the rules." He was so close now she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver just beginning at his temples, the way his throat moved when he swallowed. "And what would you have me do? Risk hurting someone else? Risk feeling that kind of helplessness again? I'd have you try living instead of merely existing." Easy words from someone who barely knows me. "You're right. I barely know you." She held his gaze. "But I know what I saw in the library today. I know the man who speaks passionately about housing reforms isn't the same man who pretends to be made of ice. And I know that somewhere under all these rules, there's someone who still wants to feel something, even if he's terrified of admitting it." The silence between them thrummed with tension, not uncomfortable but charged, alive. They stood close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, see the rapid pulse at his throat. For one wild moment, she thought he might touch her, might break his own carefully constructed rules. Instead, he stepped back. "You should return to your room, Miss Lockhart. We both should." "Yes, Your Grace." But neither of them moved. "When I saw you in my study that first day," he said quietly, "I thought you looked defeated, resigned, like someone who'd accepted invisibility as her fate." "I had. And now?" She smiled slightly. "Now I think maybe I'm tired of being invisible, even if visibility comes with risks." Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or respect. "Then we have more in common than I thought." He left first, his footsteps echoing through the darkened house. Vivian remained among the orchids, her heart racing, her mind spinning. Something had changed tonight. Some barrier had cracked, not broken but cracked. And the man beneath, the real Nathaniel Beaumont, not the Ice Duke, had been briefly, devastatingly visible. She thought about his rules, about his insistence on no public touching, and understood them differently now. They weren't about control. They were about protection, protecting others from the pain of being connected to him, protecting himself from the agony of losing someone again. But protection, taken too far, became a prison. And she'd just told one of England's most powerful dukes that he was locked in a cage of his own making. Tomorrow, she thought, she'd probably regret her boldness. Tonight, she felt more alive than she had in months. The following weeks fell into a strange new rhythm. Publicly, nothing changed. The Duke remained distant, formal, adhering rigidly to his rules. At social events he barely acknowledged Vivian's existence. She remained in her role, Lady Margaret's companion, practically invisible to everyone who mattered. But privately, things shifted in subtle ways. She'd find him in the library at odd hours, both of them pretending it was coincidence. They'd exchange brief words about books, about politics, about nothing important. He began asking her opinion on his housing reform proposals, at first tentatively, then with genuine interest when her observations proved unexpectedly insightful. "You understand how people actually live," he said one afternoon, reviewing her notes on tenant conditions. "Not just theory, but reality. I've been poor, Your Grace. Recently poor. It clarifies things." Their conversations grew longer, more honest. He told her about Caroline, not with guilt or self-flagellation, but with genuine sorrow and confusion, trying to understand what he could have done differently. She told him about her father's death, the auction of their home, the moment she'd realized she had no future except what she could earn with her own hands. "You could have married," he said once. "Some man would have taken you despite the debt." "Some man who wanted a well-bred, unpaid servant, you mean? Someone who'd hold my gratitude over my head forever?" She shook her head. "I'd rather be employed honestly than married dishonestly." "That's remarkably practical. That's remarkably necessary." Lady Margaret watched these subtle changes with knowing eyes, but said nothing. She simply created more opportunities for Vivian to assist with the Duke's correspondence, to review household accounts with him, to be present when he worked late into the night on his reforms. "You're good for him," the old woman said simply. "Don't stop." But the outside world, and Lady Cordelia, noticed nothing. To society, the Duke of Greystone remained untouchable, and his aunt's companion remained beneath notice. Until the Marchbanks Ball changed everything. The event was one of the season's most prestigious. Everyone who mattered in London society crammed into the Marchbanks palatial ballroom. Vivian attended in her role as Lady Margaret's shadow, wearing a dress the old woman had accidentally left in her room. Pale silver silk that fit perfectly and probably cost more than Vivian had earned in her entire life. "You can't wear that grey thing again," Lady Margaret had said firmly. "It's depressing me." The Duke had seen Vivian descending the stairs in the silver gown, had stopped mid-conversation with his steward, and stared for a full 3 seconds before catching himself. When their eyes met, something flickered in his gaze. Awareness, appreciation, something that made her pulse quicken. Then his expression closed, and he was the Ice Duke again. "You look appropriate, Miss Lockhart." Appropriate, as if she were a properly arranged piece of furniture. But she'd seen that unguarded moment, and it warmed her through the cold carriage ride to the Marchbanks estate. The ballroom was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers, masses of roses, the cream of London society twirling across polished floors. Vivian settled Lady Margaret in a comfortable chair, fetched refreshments, and prepared for another evening of invisibility. Then Lord Marcus Sheridan appeared, and everything tilted sideways. She knew him, had known him 3 years ago. They'd been friends. Briefly, something more before her father's debt had been revealed, and Marcus had quietly withdrawn his attentions. She'd understood. He was a second son with limited prospects. He couldn't afford to marry debt. But now he stood before her, dressed in impeccable evening clothes, his familiar boyish grin firmly in place. "Miss Lockhart, I'd heard you were in London." Lord Sheridan. She kept her voice neutral, aware of Lady Margaret's sharp interest beside her. "You look lovely. That colour suits you." His eyes travelled over the silver gown appreciatively. "Are you... that is, I understand you're employed now." Heat crept up her neck. Trust Marcus to be tactless even when trying to be kind. "I'm companion to Lady Margaret Beaumont, the Ice Duke's aunt." His eyebrows rose. How grim! He's terrifying. "He's misunderstood," Vivian said before she could stop herself. Marcus's grin widened. "Defending him? That's interesting. Tell me, Miss Lockhart, does he know he has such a loyal champion, or are you still attempting invisibility?" She should excuse herself, should retreat to her shadowy corner where companions belonged. Instead, something reckless sparked in her chest, the same recklessness that had made her speak truth to the Duke in the library. "I'm quite visible when I choose to be, my lord." "Then dance with me." He extended his hand, challenge and mischief in his eyes. "Prove it." This was dangerous. Dancing meant visibility, meant drawing exactly the attention the Duke had forbidden her to attract. It meant breaking the rules, stepping out of the shadows, risking the position she desperately needed. But it also meant being seen, being chosen, even briefly, by someone who remembered when she was more than a servant. "I really shouldn't," she began. "Nonsense," Lady Margaret interrupted, her voice carrying surprising force. "You're young, dear. Dance. I'll be perfectly fine." Marcus's hand remained extended, waiting. Across the ballroom, she caught a glimpse of the Duke in conversation with politicians, his back to her, completely unaware. Do not draw attention to yourself in any capacity. But attention, she was beginning to learn, was the only thing that made you real. She placed her hand in Marcus's. The waltz swept them onto the floor, and Vivian felt the shift immediately, heads turning, whispers starting, society noticing the companion who dared to dance. Marcus was an excellent dancer, confident and graceful, guiding her through the crowd with easy expertise. "There," he said, grinning down at her. "That wasn't so difficult, was it? Look at you, Vivian, visible again." She was. She felt it, the weight of eyes, the ripple of awareness, the way the invisible girl had suddenly materialized like a ghost becoming flesh. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I'll be dismissed for this," she said, but she was smiling. "Then the Ice Duke is a fool," Marcus spun her expertly. "You know, I regret how things ended between us. I should have been braver." "You were practical, like we all had to be. Still, I should have fought harder. You deserved that." The words wrapped around her heart, sweet and painful. She'd needed to hear them once. Now they simply felt like footnotes to a closed chapter, because across the ballroom, over Marcus's shoulder, she saw the Duke turn toward the dance floor. saw him notice her, really notice her, for the first time in public, saw his entire body go rigid, his expression shifting from cold neutrality to something far more complex. He was staring at her, at Marcus's hand on her waist, at the way they moved together, graceful and familiar, and his face. His face looked like someone had struck him. The music swirled around them, but Vivian barely heard it. She watched the Duke watch her dance with another man, watched something crack in his carefully controlled expression. Jealousy? No. It was deeper than that. It was recognition, raw and unwilling, of something he'd been desperately trying to deny. He'd said not to touch him in public. He'd built walls to keep everyone at a distance, insisted on rules and isolation and protection. But he'd never told her not to be touched by anyone else. And now, watching her in another man's arms, he was realizing what that meant, that invisibility didn't actually protect her. It just made her available to anyone who bothered to look. That his rules had kept him safe, but left her vulnerable to being claimed by any man willing to see her as more than a shadow. The song ended. Marcus bowed, thanked her, suggested they meet for another dance later. She agreed automatically, but her attention was locked on the Duke, who remained frozen across the ballroom, his grey eyes burning with something she'd never seen before. Then Lady Cordelia appeared at his side, her hand sliding possessively onto his arm, and reality crashed back. He turned to Cordelia, his expression closing like a door slamming shut. Whatever Vivian had glimpsed was locked away again, buried beneath ice and aristocratic composure. She returned to Lady Margaret, her heart hammering, her hands shaking slightly. "Well," the old woman said softly, her eyes dancing with satisfaction, "that was illuminating. I shouldn't have done that. On the contrary, dear, you absolutely should have." Lady Margaret's gaze flicked to where her nephew stood with Cordelia, tension visible in every line of his body. Sometimes people need to see what they're about to lose before they understand what they have. Vivian didn't respond. She couldn't, because she knew with absolute certainty that she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She'd broken his rules, drawn attention, been visible, and in doing so, she'd forced him to see her. The question was, what would he do about it? The carriage ride home was excruciating. Lady Margaret had left early, pleading fatigue, which meant Vivian and the Duke shared the enclosed space with only uncomfortable silence for company. He sat across from her, expression unreadable in the dim light, and said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Then, quietly, "You danced." Lady Margaret gave permission. "I didn't." Vivian's temper flared. "You're not my owner, Your Grace. You're my employer. There's a difference." "Is there?" His voice was cold, but underneath she heard something else, something wounded. "Because I was under the impression that when I establish rules for my household, they're followed. Nay, your rules were about me not touching you in public, not about me never being touched by anyone. Don't split hairs with me, Miss Lockhart. Then don't treat me like property." The words burst out, months of careful deference shattering. "You want me invisible, untouched, barely existing, but only when it's convenient for you. In private, you ask my opinions, value my thoughts, treat me like an equal. In public, I'm furniture. Well, I'm tired of being furniture, Your Grace. Lord Sheridan saw me as a person. That's more than you've done in public since I arrived." Silence. Heavy, dangerous silence. "You think I don't see you?" His voice was low, tight with barely controlled emotion. "You think for one moment, at any event, in any ballroom, I'm not acutely aware of exactly where you are?" Her breath caught. "What? You want the truth? Fine, here it is. I see you constantly. Every time you move, every time you speak to someone, every time you smile at Lady Margaret, I see you. And it's been driving me slowly insane, because seeing you means wanting things I've sworn never to want again." He leaned forward, and in the carriage's dim light his face was stark, honest, stripped of its usual control. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're saying you don't want me to dance with other men. I'm saying watching another man touch you nearly destroyed every ounce of composure I've built in 3 years. I'm saying my rules weren't about controlling you. They were about protecting myself from feeling things I've convinced myself I can't survive feeling. His jaw clenched. I'm saying I've been lying to both of us about what this is. The carriage swayed and Vivian felt her entire world tilt. What is this? I don't know. That's what terrifies me. They stared at each other across the small space, the air between them charged with everything unsaid, everything acknowledged but not yet spoken aloud. Vivian's heart hammered so hard she thought he must hear it. You told me in the conservatory that I should try living instead of existing, he said quietly. But living means risk. It means letting people close enough to hurt you. It means... He stopped, shook his head. I watched Caroline crumble under the weight of being connected to me. I won't do that to someone else. I'm not Caroline. No, you're stronger, smarter, braver, which makes it worse because losing you would... He cut himself off again, as if even thinking the words was dangerous. Would what? Would matter. More than I can afford it to matter. Vivian's throat tightened with emotions she couldn't name. This impossible man, this duke who'd demanded invisibility while seeing her constantly, who'd built walls of ice while burning inside, he was admitting things she'd barely dared hope for. But hope was dangerous when you had everything to lose. What are you asking me? She whispered. I'm not asking anything. I'm telling you that my rules weren't fair, weren't kind, and probably weren't even effective. I'm telling you that watching you dance with Sheridan made me want to tear him apart with my bare hands. I'm telling you... The carriage stopped. They'd arrived at Greystone House. Through the window, Vivian could see the footman approaching to open the door. I can't do this, the Duke said abruptly, his control slamming back into place. I can't give you what you deserve. I can't be what you need. I'm too damaged, too controlled, too afraid. She finished softly. Yes. He met her eyes. Too afraid, and I won't risk you becoming another casualty of my cowardice. The carriage door opened. The moment shattered like glass. Thank you for your service tonight, Miss Lockhart, the Duke said formally, back to being the Ice Duke, back to safety behind his walls. I'll see you tomorrow. She climbed out, numb and reeling, and watched the carriage take him away to wherever he was going. His club, perhaps, somewhere to drink away this conversation, this confession, this moment of terrifying honesty. Lady Margaret was waiting in the entrance hall, wrapped in a dressing gown, her expression knowing. He told you, didn't he? Told me what? Vivian's voice shook. That he cares, that he's been fighting it, that he's terrified. The old woman took her hands. My nephew is brilliant at many things, dear, but he's spectacularly terrible at allowing himself happiness. He'll fight this until he can't anymore. The question is, are you brave enough to wait for him to stop fighting? He said he won't risk me, won't let me become another Caroline. Of course he did, because he's an idiot. Lady Margaret squeezed her hands. Caroline was fragile, troubled, fundamentally incompatible with the life she'd been forced into. You are none of those things. But he can't see that yet. He sees you as another person who'll be damaged by association with him. Maybe he's right. Or maybe he's just too much of a coward to try. And maybe you need to decide if you're willing to make him face that cowardice. Vivian climbed to her room, her thoughts spinning. The Duke had essentially confessed feelings he refused to act on. He'd admitted he saw her, wanted her, but wouldn't allow himself to have her. He'd placed his fear above everything else, including the possibility that they could be something real, something healing. And she'd fallen in love with an impossible man who'd built walls so high he couldn't see over them anymore. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Love. She loved Nathaniel Beaumont. Loved his hidden passion, his wounded integrity, his fierce protectiveness that he pretended was coldness. loved him despite his rules, his fears, his absolute determination to keep her at arm's length. She loved a man who just told her he could never love her back. The next morning brought disaster in the form of carefully printed scandal sheets. Vivienne was helping Lady Margaret with correspondence when Mrs. Davison brought in the papers, her face pale with distress. "My lady, you should see this." The headline made Vivienne's blood run cold. "The Ice Duke's hidden flame? Duke of Greystone's household companion catches eye of Lord Sheridan." But who else? The article was viciously clever, never directly accusing, but implying everything. It described the mysterious Miss L, who served Lady Margaret, her sudden appearance in fashionable ballrooms, her dance with Lord Sheridan. It hinted at impropriety, suggested the Duke might have interests beyond proper employer-employee relations, questioned why a well-bred lady had been reduced to servitude in the first place. And it mentioned, with devastating casualness, that Miss Vivienne Lockhart's father had died deeply in debt, possibly by his own hand, and that perhaps the daughter shared his unstable tendencies. "Oh, my dear," Lady Margaret breathed, reading over her shoulder. "This is Cordelia's work. It has to be. It doesn't matter whose work it is." Vivienne's hands shook as she set down the paper. "The damage is done. I've brought scandal to your household. I should leave immediately." "You'll do no such thing." "Lady Margaret, no." The old woman's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "You'll stay. We'll weather this. Nathaniel will know what to do." But when the Duke arrived an hour later, his face like carved marble, Vivienne knew immediately what he would do. "Pack your things," he said without preamble, standing in Lady Margaret's sitting room like a general issuing orders. "I'm sending you to my estate in Derbyshire. You'll stay there until this dies down." "Nathaniel, don't be absurd," Lady Margaret began. "It's not absurd. It's necessary." He wouldn't look at Vivienne directly. "The scandal sheets are already being widely circulated. Lord Ashworth, Cordelia's father, is using this to question my judgment, suggesting I'm unfit to champion housing reforms if I can't maintain appropriate boundaries in my own household. The only way to stop this is to remove the source of speculation." "The source?" Vivienne's voice was ice. "You mean me, the inconvenient woman who dared to dance in public?" "I mean the woman who's being used as a weapon against everything I've been working toward." He finally met her eyes, and she saw the bleakness there. "This is my fault. I should have been more careful, more what? More committed to keeping me invisible." "You were. The problem is visibility, apparently, is considered scandalous. Don't make this harder than it is." "Why not? You're sending me away because I'm inconvenient, because protecting your political interests matters more than—" She stopped, catching herself before she said something she couldn't take back. "More than what?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. "More than basic decency, more than the truth, more than—" "More than me," she wanted to say, but didn't. "It doesn't matter. You're right. I should go." "Vivienne," Lady Margaret said urgently, but she was already standing, already moving toward the door. "I'll pack," she said flatly. "How soon do you need me gone, Your Grace?" Something flickered across his face. Pain, regret, helplessness. "Tomorrow morning." "I'll arrange the carriage." She left without another word. Behind her, she heard Lady Margaret start to argue, heard the Duke's response, low, firm, implacable. He'd made his choice. His reforms, his reputation, his careful control. They all mattered more than the woman he'd admitted just last night that he saw constantly. She was invisible again, and this time it was permanent. But that night, in the library where they'd had so many careful conversations, Nathaniel Beaumont sat alone with a bottle of brandy and faced the truth he'd been running from. He loved her. Not carefully, not moderately, not in any way that could be controlled or managed. He loved Vivian Lockhart with a desperate intensity that terrified him, that made him understand why men did stupid, reckless, reputation-destroying things for women they couldn't live without. He'd watched her dance with Sheridan, and jealousy had ripped through him like fire. He'd sat across from her in the carriage, and admitting his feelings had felt like pulling out his own heart. He'd read the scandal sheets this morning, seen her name dragged through society's mud, and wanted to burn London to the ground. And his response: send her away, hide her, protect himself and his precious reforms by making her invisible again. He was a coward, just like Cordelia had said. "You're wallowing." Lady Margaret stood in the doorway, wrapped in her dressing gown, her expression disappointed. "I'm solving a problem," he corrected, refilling his glass. "You're running away. Again." She moved into the room, settling into the chair across from him. "Just like you ran after Caroline died, just like you've been running for 3 years. I'm protecting her." From what? Society's gossip. It will pass. Cordelia's schemes. We can fight those. Or are you protecting her from yourself? Lady Margaret's gaze was sharp. Because that's what this really is, isn't it? You're terrified that if you let her stay, if you fight for her, you might actually have to be happy. And happiness to you feels like a betrayal. Caroline wasn't happy. Being married to me destroyed her. Caroline was troubled long before she met you, and you know it. Her family hid her instability, married her off to someone powerful, and hoped for the best. You did everything you could to help her, and it wasn't enough, not because you failed, but because some things can't be fixed. Lady Margaret leaned forward. But Vivian isn't Caroline. She's strong, capable, and she's in love with you. His head snapped up. She doesn't have to say it. I see it every time she looks at you, every time she defends you to others, every time she waits in that library hoping you'll appear. The old woman's voice softened. She loves you, Nathaniel. And you love her. The only question is whether you're brave enough to admit it before you lose her forever. I'm sending her away to protect her. You're sending her away to protect yourself. There's a difference. Lady Margaret stood, her disappointment palpable. I thought Caroline's death taught you that life is too short for cowardice. Apparently I was wrong. She left him alone with his brandy and his demons. Nathaniel sat in the darkness, his aunt's words echoing. She loves you. Could it be true? He thought of Vivian's face in the carriage last night, the way she'd looked at him when he'd confessed he saw her constantly. The hurt when he'd backtracked, too afraid to follow his own feelings to their logical conclusion. He thought of her dancing with Sheridan, graceful and alive, finally visible after months of forced invisibility. And he thought of how seeing her in another man's arms had felt like someone driving a blade between his ribs. This was love. Painful, inconvenient, absolutely terrifying love, and tomorrow morning he was sending it away to Derbyshire because he was too much of a coward to fight for it. The night stretched endlessly. By dawn, Nathaniel had made no decision except to feel progressively more miserable about the decision he'd already made. Vivienne packed mechanically, folding dresses she'd barely worn, gathering books she'd been reading. The silver gown, Lady Margaret's gift, lay across her bed, and she couldn't bring herself to pack it, couldn't bear to take the reminder of the night she'd been visible, chosen, real. The night before, everything fell apart. A knock at her door. Mrs. Davison entered, her face troubled. "Miss Lockhart, Lady Margaret would like to see you before you depart." "In the morning room." Vivian found the old woman surrounded by correspondence, her expression determined. "Sit, dear. We need to talk. If this is about staying, it's about fighting." Lady Margaret pushed a stack of letters across the table. "I've spent the night writing to every influential woman I know, explaining the situation, vouching for your character, describing exactly how Cordelia Ashworth orchestrated this scandal because my nephew rejected her marriage proposal." Vivian's eyes widened. "You can't." "I can and I have. Cordelia wants to play games with scandal sheets? Fine. I'll play with the truth." By tomorrow, every matron in London will know that the real scandal isn't you, dear. It's a vindictive woman trying to destroy an innocent girl out of spite. Lady Margaret's smile was sharp. I may be old, but I'm not powerless, and I won't let that harpy ruin you. The Duke won't approve. The Duke can learn to live with it. Lady Margaret took Vivian's hands. Now, you have a choice. You can get in that carriage and go to Derbyshire, safe, hidden, invisible again. Or you can stay, fight beside me, and show my idiot nephew that some things are worth the risk. He doesn't want me to stay. He's terrified for you to stay. There's a difference. The old woman squeezed gently. What do you want, Vivian? What did she want? To be safe, to be hidden, to spend the rest of her life wondering what might have happened if she'd been brave enough to fight? Or did she want to be seen, truly seen, by a man who'd admitted he saw her constantly but was too afraid to act on it? I want to stay, she whispered, but he's sending me away. Then don't get in the carriage. Lady Margaret, I mean it. When that carriage arrives, don't get in. Stay here. Make him face you, face this, face the choice he's really making. Lady Margaret's eyes gleamed. He needs to understand that pushing you away isn't protection, it's loss. And the only way he'll understand that is if you refuse to disappear. It was dangerous, reckless, potentially disastrous for her employment prospects if she defied a direct order from the Duke of Greystone. It was also the bravest thing anyone had suggested she do in months. He'll be furious, Vivian said. Good. Fury is better than ice. Fury means feeling something. The carriage arrived precisely at 9 o'clock. Vivian watched from the morning room window as the Duke supervised the loading of her trunks. Trunks she hadn't actually packed, but that Mrs. Davison had helpfully filled with odds and ends to maintain the illusion. He looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His cravat was tied with less than his usual precision, and his shoulders carried a weight that looked like grief. Good, she thought with a fierceness that surprised her. You should grieve this. You should feel the cost of sending me away. The Duke entered the morning room, his expression carefully neutral. The carriage is ready, Miss Lockhart. I've included funds for the journey and a letter of introduction for the housekeeper at Thornfield Hall. You'll be comfortable there. Will I? She stood, facing him directly. Comfortable and invisible and safely tucked away where I won't inconvenience your political ambitions? His jaw tightened. That's not fair, isn't it? You're sending me away to protect your reputation. That's the truth. I'm sending you away because staying here will destroy you. Society will tear you apart. Cordelia will ensure your name becomes synonymous with scandal. I'm trying to save you from that. I don't need saving, Vivian said quietly. I need someone brave enough to stand beside me while I save myself. For a moment, one brief, devastating moment, she saw him waver. Saw the man beneath the ice considering, hoping, almost believing. Then the walls slammed back. The carriage is waiting. Then it will wait a long time. She lifted her chin. Because I'm not getting in it. Silence. Absolute shocked silence. Excuse me. His voice was dangerously soft. I'm not leaving, Your Grace. I'm staying here in this house doing my job. You can dismiss me if you want. You can send me away without references, without pay, without anything, but you'll have to do it to my face, not by hiding me in Derbyshire until the scandal dies down. Vivian, no, you don't get to use my name now. Not after spending months demanding I be invisible, then admitting you saw me constantly, then deciding visibility was too dangerous and sending me away. Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. You told me last night that watching me dance made you want to tear Lord Sheridan apart. You said losing me would matter more than you could afford. Well, you're about to lose me, not to scandal, not to society, but to your own cowardice. His face had gone white. I'm trying to protect you. You're trying to protect yourself from having to feel something real. She moved closer, close enough to see the rapid pulse at his throat. the way his hands had fisted at his sides. "You're terrified that if you let me stay, if you fight for me, you might actually have to risk your heart again. And that's more frightening to you than any scandal. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You loved Carolyn, and losing her nearly destroyed you. You've convinced yourself that caring about anyone is dangerous, that vulnerability is weakness, that the only way to survive is to lock yourself away." She held his gaze. "But I'm not Caroline. I'm not fragile or troubled or incompatible with your life. I'm strong enough to weather scandal. The question is, are you strong enough to let me?" The silence stretched taut between them. Vivienne could hear her own heartbeat, could see the conflict raging behind his eyes, fear against desire, control against surrender, safety against the terrifying possibility of happiness. "I can't," he finally whispered. "I can't risk you. I can't." "Then dismiss me." She said it flatly, every word a blade. "Tell me right now to my face that you want me gone, that you don't care if I leave, that sending me away is easier than fighting for something real." "Vivienne, please, say it." "I can't say it." The admission was torn from him, raw and desperate. "God help me, I can't. But I also can't ask you to stay and watch while society destroys you because of me." "Then don't ask. I'm telling you I'm staying. Despite the scandal, despite Cordelia, despite everything, I'm staying. The question isn't whether I'm brave enough, it's whether you are." She left him standing in the morning room, walked past the waiting carriage, and went directly to Lady Margaret's side. Behind her, she heard the Duke's sharp exhale. Not relief, not anger, but something closer to anguish. The sound of a man realizing he'd just been given exactly what he wanted and had no idea what to do with it. The next 48 hours were brutal. Cordelia escalated her campaign with vicious efficiency. More scandal sheets appeared, each more damaging than the last. They described Vivienne as a scheming social climber who'd manipulated her way into the Duke's household. They suggested impropriety, hinted at moral failings, dragged up her father's debts and suicide, with cruel specificity. The Duke's Housing Reform Committee postponed their vote, citing concerns about his judgment. Lord Ashworth made pointed comments about men who couldn't maintain proper boundaries in their own homes, attempting to legislate morality for others. And through it all, Nathaniel Beaumont remained trapped between protecting Vivienne and protecting everything he'd worked to build. Lady Margaret's counter-campaign worked slowly. Her letters circulated through the most influential drawing rooms in London, but social opinion was like turning a massive ship. It took time, and damage accumulated in the meantime. Vivienne endured with outward calm and inner turmoil. She continued her duties, sat with Lady Margaret, pretended not to notice the way servants whispered or how the Duke avoided her completely. Because that's what he did. After her refusal to leave, he'd retreated entirely. He worked in his study, took meals alone, and disappeared to his club every evening. The man who'd admitted he saw her constantly now went to extraordinary lengths never to see her at all. It hurt more than the scandal sheets. On the third morning, Mrs. Davison brought devastating news. Lord Ashworth has demanded the Duke appear before the Housing Reform Committee, the housekeeper said, her face pale. They're requiring him to explain his household situation before they'll proceed with the vote. If he can't satisfy them, they'll vote against the reforms, Vivienne finished, her stomach sinking. And everything he's worked for will be destroyed. Because of me. Not because of you, dear, Lady Margaret said firmly. Because of Cordelia's vindictiveness and her father's political manipulation. There's a difference. But Vivienne knew the truth. Her presence, her refusal to disappear, was the weapon being used against Nathaniel. If she left now, quietly, without fuss, the scandal would die down. The committee would be satisfied. His reforms would pass. All it required was her invisibility. Again. She found him in the library that night, surrounded by papers, his face haggard. He looked up when she entered, and for once he didn't hide his emotions. He looked exhausted, defeated, and utterly miserable. "I'm leaving," she said without preamble. His head snapped up. "What? Tomorrow morning I'll take the carriage to Derbyshire. You can tell the committee I've been dismissed, relocated, whatever they need to hear. Your reforms will pass, Cordelia will lose her leverage, and everything will go back to normal." He stood slowly, papers scattering. "No. It's the only solution." "No," he repeated, his voice stronger now. "You were right. I've been a coward. I've been so terrified of losing someone again that I've been losing you piece by piece while pretending it was protection." He moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. "I don't want you to go." "But the committee." "Damn the committee. Damn Cordelia. Damn all of it." He was close now, closer than he'd been since that night in the conservatory, and his eyes burned with something that looked like desperation. "I've spent 3 years convinced that caring about someone was too dangerous, that vulnerability would destroy me, that the only way to survive was to lock myself away and let no one close enough to matter. Nathaniel, let me finish, please." He took a shaking breath. "Then you walked into my study 3 months ago, looking defeated and resigned, and I thought, good. Someone who won't demand anything, someone who'll stay invisible. But you didn't stay invisible. You challenged me, questioned me, saw through every wall I'd built. You made me feel things I'd sworn never to feel again, and it terrified me so completely that I tried to send you away rather than admit I—" He stopped, jaw clenched. "Admit what?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "That I love you." The words came out rough, unpracticed, as if he'd never said them aloud before. "I love you, Vivian. Not carefully, not moderately, not in any way that makes sense. I love you desperately and completely and terrifyingly. And the thought of you leaving, of losing you because I was too much of a coward to fight, is worse than any scandal, any political defeat, any risk society could threaten me with." Vivian's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "You can't say that." "Why not? Because it's inconvenient? Because it complicates everything? Because admitting it means risking everything I've built?" He reached for her hand, hesitated, then took it anyway, breaking his own rule, shattering his own control. "I don't care anymore. The only thing I care about is you staying, not hiding in Derbyshire, not being invisible, but here with me, visible and chosen and—" She kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't careful, wasn't any of the things a proper lady should do. She simply couldn't bear another second of space between them, another moment of him fighting himself while declaring love with such desperate honesty. He froze for a heartbeat, shocked. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he kissed her back with 3 years of repressed emotion breaking free all at once. His mouth was desperate against hers, his hands trembling as they cupped her face, and she felt the exact moment his last wall crumbled completely. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm still terrified," he admitted. "Good, so am I. What if I fail you? What if I can't protect you from— Then we'll fail together." She held his face between her hands. "I don't need you to be perfect, Nathaniel. I don't need you to be the Ice Duke or some untouchable figure of control. I just need you to be brave enough to try, to fight with me instead of for me, to let me be visible beside you, not hidden away, for my own protection. The committee meeting is tomorrow. If I acknowledge publicly that you matter to me, Ashworth will use it to destroy everything. Then let him try." She smiled, fierce and determined. "But fight, Nathaniel. For once, fight instead of retreating." He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway." For the first time in 3 years, the Duke of Greystone laughed. The committee meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock at Lord Ashworth's London residence. A deliberate power play that forced Nathaniel onto enemy territory. He arrived precisely on time, walked into the drawing room where a dozen men sat in judgment, and immediately broke every expectation. Vivian entered beside him. The shock was immediate and visible. Lord Ashworth's face went purple. Lord Pemberton actually gasped. The other committee members exchanged glances, ranging from scandalized to fascinated. "Gentlemen," Nathaniel said calmly, as if bringing his household companion to a political meeting was perfectly normal. "Thank you for meeting with me. Before we discuss the housing reforms, I believe we should address the elephant in the room, or rather, the woman standing beside me. Your Grace, this is highly irregular," Lord Ashworth began. "What's irregular," Nathaniel interrupted smoothly, "is using scandal sheets and vicious gossip to manipulate political votes. But since we're here, let me be absolutely clear about the situation you've all been whispering about." He turned to Vivienne, and in front of a dozen powerful men, he took her hand. "Miss Vivienne Lockhart has been employed in my household for 3 months as companion to my aunt. She is the daughter of the late Baron Lockhart, a thoroughly respectable family fallen on unfortunate times. She is educated, intelligent, and has conducted herself with complete propriety since arriving at Greystone House." His voice was steel wrapped in silk. "The scandal surrounding her is entirely manufactured by individuals who hope to use her as a weapon against me. It failed." "Your Grace," Lord Pemberton ventured, The rumors suggest exactly what they were designed to suggest. But here's the truth that Lady Cordelia Ashworth failed to account for when she orchestrated this smear campaign." Nathaniel's grip on Vivian's hand tightened slightly. "I'm in love with Miss Lockhart. I intend to marry her. And any man in this room who has a problem with that can vote against my reforms, spread whatever gossip they like, and make themselves comfortable on the wrong side of both history and my memory." The silence was absolute. Vivian stared at him, her heart hammering. He'd just, in front of the committee that controlled his political future, declared his intention to marry her. Publicly, irrevocably, with full knowledge of the consequences. Lord Ashworth recovered first, his voice shaking with rage. "You can't seriously expect us to what? Vote based on the merit of the reforms rather than gossip about my personal life?" Nathaniel's smile was cold. "I expect precisely that, Lord Ashworth. I've spent 8 months documenting the abysmal conditions in tenant housing across London. I've proposed comprehensive reforms that would improve thousands of lives. Those reforms stand on their own merit, regardless of whom I choose to marry. You're marrying a disgraced baron's daughter. I'm marrying a remarkable woman who's been unjustly targeted by your daughter's vindictiveness." Nathaniel's voice dropped, dangerous and quiet. "Let's be honest about what this really is. Lady Cordelia wanted to be Duchess of Greystone. I refused. She's been punishing me and Miss Lockhart ever since. You've allowed her to use this committee as a weapon in her personal vendetta. How dare you? How dare I tell the truth?" Nathaniel stepped forward, still holding Vivian's hand. "Here's another truth, gentlemen. These reforms will pass eventually, with or without your support. Social progress is inevitable. The only question is whether you'll be remembered as the men who led that progress or the men who obstructed it, because one of you was bitter about his daughter's rejection." Lord Pemberton cleared his throat. "Your Grace, if you'd given us some warning about your attachment, would it have mattered? Or would you have used it as justification to delay the vote regardless?" Nathaniel looked each man in the eye. "I'm not here to apologize for loving someone. I'm here to demand that you vote on the reforms based on their merit. If you can't separate personal bias from political judgment, then perhaps you shouldn't be on this committee at all." The threat was clear. Nathaniel had power, connections, and influence. He could make problems for any man in this room if he chose, and he was choosing to fight. Lord Ashworth's face was apoplectic, but 3 other men were nodding slowly. Lord Pemberton actually looked impressed. The tide was turning, not completely but enough. I propose we table this discussion, Lord Pemberton said carefully, and vote on the reforms at next week's session, based solely on their merit, as His Grace suggests. Those in favour? 6 hands rose, not a majority of the full committee, but enough to proceed. Lord Ashworth looked like he'd swallowed glass. This isn't over. It is, Nathaniel said quietly, because I won't be intimidated, blackmailed or manipulated into hiding what matters to me. Not anymore. They left together, Vivian's hand still clasped in his, the committee room buzzing with shocked conversation behind them. In the carriage, she finally found her voice. You just told a room full of powerful men you're going to marry me. I did. Without asking me first. Ah. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I may have gotten ahead of myself. In my defense, I was making a point about... She kissed him, stopping his explanation. Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I love you. Yes to everything you're too afraid to ask properly. She smiled against his mouth. But next time, maybe ask before declaring intentions to political committees. He laughed, really laughed, deep and genuine. Noted, though I make no promises about my ability to think clearly when you're involved. You rather destroy my famous self-control. Good, it was never as impressive as society thought anyway. Cruel woman. But he was smiling as he kissed her again. They arrived at Greystone House to find Lady Margaret waiting in the entrance hall, her expression somewhere between triumphant and exasperated. Well, she demanded, did you grovel? Did you declare yourself? Did you make a complete fool of yourself in front of the committee? All 3, Nathaniel confirmed. Excellent. When's the wedding? Aunt Margaret. Don't Aunt Margaret me. You've wasted 3 years being miserable. I won't let you waste another 3 months being engaged. 2 weeks, St. George's. I'll send the invitations tomorrow. 2 weeks isn't enough time. It's more than enough time. Vivienne, dear, do you object to a quick wedding? Not at all, Vivienne said, grinning at Nathaniel's expression. Then it's settled. Now there's someone here to see you. She arrived about an hour ago, demanding to speak with you immediately. Lady Cordelia stood in the drawing room, her beautiful face contorted with rage. When Nathaniel and Vivienne entered together, still holding hands, her expression turned venomous. How touching, she sneered. The Ice Duke and his charity project. Lady Cordelia, Nathaniel said coldly, I don't recall inviting you. I came to offer one final chance, dismiss her quietly, announce that the engagement rumours were false, and I'll convince my father to support your precious reforms. Her smile was sharp. Or refuse, and watch your political career crumble. My political career can crumble. My reforms will pass eventually, but Vivienne, he squeezed her hand gently, is not negotiable. You're throwing away everything for a woman with no money, no position, and no value to your future. I'm choosing the only future I actually want. Nathaniel's voice was quiet, final. You need to leave, Cordelia, and stop orchestrating scandal campaigns. It's beneath you. Beneath me? She laughed, the sound brittle. You humiliated me. Rejected me for a dead woman's memory, then for a servant. You deserve everything I've done to you. Perhaps I do, but Vivienne doesn't. And that's what you can't understand, that hurting me means hurting someone innocent and you don't care. He moved toward the door, making his intention clear. You have 2 choices. Leave with whatever dignity you have left, or I'll have you removed, and I'll ensure every matron in London knows exactly how you've behaved. For a moment, Cordelia looked like she might attack him physically. Then her composure cracked completely, rage and hurt spilling out in equal measure. You'll regret this, she hissed. Both of you. I doubt it, Vivienne said quietly. It was the first time she'd spoken directly to Cordelia, and something in her calm confidence made the other woman flinch. Because we have something you'll never understand. We actually care about each other. Not about position or power or revenge. Just each other. Cordelia left without another word, but the slam of the front door echoed through the house. "That went well," Lady Margaret said dryly, appearing from where she'd been shamelessly eavesdropping. "She'll cause more problems," Nathaniel warned. "Let her try. We'll fight them together." Vivian looked up at him. All of them, every scandal, every whisper, every scheme, together. He pulled her close, and for the first time in 3 years, Nathaniel Beaumont felt something he'd thought lost forever. Hope. The wedding was chaos in the best possible way. Lady Margaret had organized everything with military precision despite the 2-week timeline. St. George's was decorated with white roses. Half of London society had been invited, and the other half was furious about being excluded. Vivian stood in the bride's room, wearing a gown Lady Margaret had commissioned, ivory silk with delicate embroidery, elegant and beautiful without being ostentatious. Her hands shook slightly as the lady's maid adjusted her veil. "Nervous?" Lady Margaret asked, appearing beside her. "Terrified? What if society doesn't approve?" "They don't. What if Cordelia causes another scene? She might. What if people whisper about you for the rest of your life? Because I've watched my nephew transform from a dead man walking into someone who actually laughs again. Because I've seen you become visible in ways that have nothing to do with society's approval. Because love, real love, is worth every scandal." The music began. Vivian took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and walked toward her future. The church was packed. She saw faces she recognized, some friendly, some hostile, some simply curious. She saw Cordelia in the back, her expression carefully blank. She saw Lord Sheridan, who caught her eye and mouthed "Congratulations" with genuine warmth. But mostly she saw Nathaniel. He stood at the altar, impeccably dressed, watching her approach with an expression that made her breath catch. Not the Ice Duke's cold composure, not careful control or rigid formality, just love, open, vulnerable, absolutely certain. When she reached him, he took her hand, and his fingers trembled slightly against hers. "Hello," he whispered. "Hello," she whispered back. The ceremony was traditional, beautiful and completely surreal. When the vicar pronounced them married, Nathaniel kissed her thoroughly enough to make several elderly ladies gasp, and everyone else smile. The reception at Greystone House was everything a ducal celebration should be, elaborate, elegant, and packed with important people. But Vivian barely noticed. She was too focused on the man beside her, the way he touched her freely now, small gestures that proclaimed ownership and devotion, a hand at her waist, fingers brushing hers, his arm around her shoulders. Public touching, the thing he'd forbidden 3 months ago, now performed with deliberate, joyful defiance. "You're doing it on purpose," she murmured during a waltz. "Doing what?" "Touching me in public, breaking your own rules." "They were stupid rules." He pulled her slightly closer, scandalously close for a formal dance. "I spent 3 years afraid to feel anything. I won't spend another day hiding what I feel. Even if society talks? Especially if society talks. Let them see that the Ice Duke melted. Let them know that grief doesn't have to be permanent, that walls can come down, that love is worth every risk." She rested her head against his shoulder, breaking every rule of proper dancing. "I love you. I know. You married me despite my numerous flaws and terrible timing." He kissed her hair. "Thank you." "For what?" "For refusing to be invisible. For fighting when I was too afraid to. For seeing me when I was desperately trying not to be seen." His arms tightened around her. "For saving me without making me feel weak. You saved yourself. I just reminded you that you could." They danced until the musicians grew tired, laughed with guests until propriety demanded they retire, and finally escaped to their rooms, now shared, now theirs, with relief and anticipation in equal measure. Nathaniel closed the door behind them, locked it, and then simply looked at her. Really looked, the way he'd admitted he'd been doing for months but never allowed himself to acknowledge. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making you happy, he said. That's a large promise. I know. I'll probably fail occasionally. I'm still learning how to be someone who doesn't live behind walls. But I promise I'll try. Vivian moved into his arms, comfortable and certain. Then I promise to remind you when you start building walls again. And you promise to remind me when I start accepting invisibility. Deal. He kissed her, and this time there were no interruptions, no scandals, no fears. Just two people who'd found each other despite themselves, who'd chosen visibility and vulnerability over safety, and who'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let someone see you completely. Later, wrapped in his arms, Vivian thought about the journey that had brought her here, from invisible companion to duchess, from defeated girl to woman who'd fought for what she wanted. She thought about that first day in his study when he'd told her not to touch him in public and smiled. "What's funny?" he murmured, half asleep. "I was just thinking about your rules." "Which ones?" "All of them, but especially the one about touching in public." He opened one eye. "That was my stupidest rule." "Agreed, but it led to this." "How?" "Because breaking it, watching me dance with someone else, realizing you couldn't keep me invisible, that's when you finally admitted you wanted me." She kissed him softly. "Sometimes the rules we build to protect ourselves end up teaching us what we really need." "What do we really need?" "To be seen, chosen, touched." She smiled. "To be human instead of perfect." "I'm definitely not perfect." "No, but you're mine." "Yes," he agreed, pulling her closer. "Always." The housing reforms passed 3 weeks later with overwhelming support. Lord Ashworth's opposition had crumbled when several committee members, apparently impressed by Nathaniel's willingness to fight for what mattered, rallied behind the proposals. The vote was decisive, the reforms comprehensive, and the Duke's political reputation stronger than ever. Society whispered, of course. They always would, but the whispers changed tone, from scandalized to intrigued, from condemning to almost admiring. The Ice Duke had melted for love. It was romantic in a way society couldn't quite resist, even as they pretended to disapprove. Cordelia left London for Paris, her father's political influence quietly diminished by his association with failed manipulation. Some said she'd left in shame. Others suggested she'd simply moved on to new hunting grounds. Vivienne didn't particularly care either way. 6 months after the wedding, Lady Margaret hosted a garden party at Greystone House. The event was smaller than most ducal entertainments. Carefully curated guest list, intimate atmosphere, genuine conversation instead of forced social climbing. Vivienne, now firmly established as the Duchess of Greystone, moved through the gathering with confidence that had nothing to do with title and everything to do with being genuinely happy. She noticed everything, the way women who'd once ignored her now sought her opinion, the way men who'd walked past her now acknowledged her with respect, the way she was finally completely visible, not because she'd fought for visibility, but because she'd stopped accepting invisibility. "You look contemplative." Nathaniel appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her waist with casual affection that still made her heart skip. "I was thinking about that first day, when you told me not to touch you in public. Please don't remind me of my stupidity." "It wasn't stupid. You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how." She leaned into him. "But look at us now. Touching in public. Scandalous." "Terribly scandalous," he agreed, kissing her temple. "What will society think? That the Ice Duke is thoroughly, happily melted, and his Duchess is exactly where she belongs." "Which is?" "Beside you, visible, chosen." She smiled up at him. "Touching you in public whenever I damn well please." He laughed, the sound free and genuine. "I love you. I know you tell me constantly. Only because I spent 3 years not saying it, I'm making up for lost time." They stood together in the garden, surrounded by guests, completely visible, and Vivian thought about the girl she'd been, defeated, resigned, accepting invisibility as her fate. That girl seemed impossibly distant now. She'd been taught her whole life that being seen was a privilege granted by society, by birth, by circumstances beyond her control. But she'd learned something different. Being seen was a choice. A brave, dangerous, absolutely necessary choice to refuse invisibility, to fight for presence, to demand to be acknowledged as fully human. And she'd learned it from the man beside her, the Ice Duke, who'd spent years invisible behind his own walls, who'd finally chosen to be seen despite every fear. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "That I'm grateful. For what? For refusing to get in that carriage, for fighting when it would have been easier to hide, for being brave enough to make you be brave too." He turned her to face him fully, his hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "You were never meant to be invisible, Vivian. You were always meant to be seen, chosen, celebrated." "I was never invisible to you," she corrected softly. "You just needed time to admit you were looking. And now I'll never stop looking, never stop choosing you, never stop touching you in public just to prove I can." He kissed her, sweet and thorough, right there in his garden with dozens of guests watching. Let them talk, let them whisper, let society make whatever judgments it wanted. Vivian Beaumont, Duchess of Greystone, was done being invisible. She was seen, she was chosen, she was loved. And she'd never been more perfectly, beautifully, courageously herself. She was never meant to disappear. She was always meant to be chosen. Thank you for staying with Vivian and Nathaniel until the very end. If this story reminded you that being seen is worth the risk, please hit that like button and share what moment resonated with you most in the comments. If you know someone who needs to hear they're worthy of being chosen, share this story with them. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next tale about second chances and rebuilding trust. Thank you for being here. You're the reason we create these stories. We see you, and we can't wait to share the next journey with you.